Our next session is entitled Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility, Walking the Walk of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Workplaces to Address Systemic Inequities and Cultivate Greater Belongings. We're going to do this also as a panel discussion. This panel is going to be moderated by Guled Ali, the head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Johnson & Johnson Canada. It is going to feature Manuelita Cherizard, the Chief Human Resources Officer for the ROM, Paul Anthony Hamilton, we just met, the Director of Talent Acquisition for LCBO formerly, and join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Thank you. Thanks, Professor. All in the middle.
Yeah.
You want to sit
Okay.
down?
Oh, sure.
Good morning. Oh, am I on? Good? Yep. Morning, everyone. I have the honor and privilege of leading our DEI, EDI, IDEA panel. So looking forward to speaking with Manuelita and Paul this morning. So maybe we'll just start with a round of introductions. Over to you.
Sure. Good morning. Happy to be here. Manuelita Cherizard. I'm the Chief HR Officer at ROM. I think most people in the audience have heard of ROM, Canada's top museum, and I've been there for 3 years, responsible for all HR functions.
I've got a date, and I'm taking her to the ROM on Saturday. I'm so excited, and I didn't even ask if I can get discount tickets, but that's another conversation. Paul Hamilton, I'm in talent acquisition. I work for great companies, including the LCBO, Microsoft, and other big organizations, and I'm super excited to be part of this panel.
Awesome. And then for those that remember me from yesterday, my name is Guled. For those that are new here, welcome. I'm the head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Johnson & Johnson Canada. Been with the organization for 11 years, and like I said before, I'll be moderating this panel. So before we dive in, just want to sort of Manuelita and Paul hear your why. Why DEI? Why are you in this space? I know a lot of times, as a practitioner myself, it's all, a big portion of it comes down to our passion, right, or our why. So if I were to ask both of you what your whys are, and if you can share it with the audience, maybe you can ground us, in terms of a good start.
Okay, sure. So my why is all around my love for human beings. My why is I'm motivated by ensuring that everyone is feels heard, feels included, feels welcome, and therefore they're able to do their best work, live their best life. And it really marries my lived experience and natural tendencies with my professional responsibilities.
I wish I had this altruistic response that was going to be so compelling and gripping. But simply put, my why, my kids, my two boys. My two boys, I was married, and it was a mixed marriage. So my kids are struggling with, number one, identifying with what their identity is. And my son is 20, and my other son is 16. And I just worry about what the future is going to hold for them. Now, I always remind them that we've come such a far way, like if we think about where we were 50 years ago and where we are today, but I also think about what's going to happen when they start looking for a job or when they start to encounter challenges from a racist or diversity perspective. Will they have the tools and resources to navigate it successfully? But more importantly, will organizations be more accommodating and more welcoming? So my why is simply my two boys.
Awesome. Thank you. And just to round out, I guess, the panel / moderator myself, my why is health equity. And that's the reason I think why I'm at Johnson & Johnson. Well, I know why I'm at Johnson & Johnson. It's around making sure that everyone has access to healthcare, whether you're an indigenous and struggling with access to adequate healthcare, right? We know within our 2S LGBTQI community, there's increased rates of mental health and well-being issues. Or in the lung cancer business, or in the lung cancer therapeutic area, it disproportionately impacts people of color and individuals from Asian Canadian backgrounds, right? So from my perspective, my why is always grounded down in the patient journey and making sure that patients have good access to healthcare and health outcomes. So just from a grounds rules perspective, team, I know you probably heard EDI, DEI, IDEA. We're all talking about the same thing, right? So I just want to all three of those terms you might hear about them interchangeably. And then just from a grounds rules perspective, this is a safe space, right? So at the end of the session, please ask questions. There's no such thing as a stupid question. We will give you the grace to say the wrong things. We ask the same of you. That's the grace of the panel and the moderators, myself, to say the wrong things. We're all learning on this journey. So with that, doesn't seem to work. There we go. Okay. First question over to you, Paul. We know there's multiple components of having a successful DE&I program. A lot of it does boil down to having good allies in the organization that can advocate for those individuals that may feel they don't have a voice at the table. What would your take be on allyship?
I'm going to share two quick stories. Number one is I was working at Microsoft, and I go into the office early we had a gym, so I go in there and work out. I was driving one day. It was about 4:30 in the morning. I get pulled over by two police officers. They pull out their flashlights. I'm the only car on the road. They pull out their flashlights. They come, open my window, can I see your driver's license, all that wonderful stuff. Now, they're doing their job. I've got the fear of God in me right now, right? Because it's 4:30 in the morning, it's pitch black, I am on the 407, and there's not another car on the road, and so I'm scared. They don't know that, but I'm terrified. Eventually, everything was fine, and I asked them, why did you pull me over? Well, we looked at your license plate, and you had the Toronto Raptors logo on it. We thought you were one of the Raptors players. Now, it's funny. People are laughing. Yeah. I wasn't laughing in that moment. I went to work that day, and I struggled. And one of my colleagues, a white male guy by the name of Alan Palmer, who to this very day is like a good friend of mine, he was mortified when I told him that story. He marched to the police station in the middle of the workday, and he demanded that he get those two officers' badge numbers and that they had to apologize to me. I wasn't even thinking on that level. I just wanted to make sure I could get home that night. But he, in that act, indicated that he was an ally without even saying it. So that was one example. The second one was recently. I started at my last job on May 26, 2020, and we all know what happened on that day. The next day, I got a phone call from a CIO who happens to be another white male, and he said, Paul, what do we do? My response was, I don't know. I've never experienced this either. What do we do? But in that conversation, his first reaction was, how can I help? And I think we have to recognize that allyship is an essential component for two reasons. Number one, I'm sure we've all heard about the pale pyramid. That is, these companies that are pumping themselves on the chest. Hey, we've got diversity, it's amazing. But when you look at the top of their house, everyone down for the first three layers are all white male. But the diversity is, if I think about this hotel, without naming anything, there are probably good diversity levels at the house cleaning, room cleaning, or the folks that are parking the cars, or things of that, or in the kitchen staff, right? So that's one issue. And the other piece is 86% of journalists or journalist supervisors are white male. 85% of the top 3 positions in all journalist organizations are white male. Guess who's defining and creating the narrative? Who controls the narrative? So I think it's important that we don't see them as, agitators. It's how can we work together to change the narrative? How can we work together to change the landscape? And that's only going to happen if we rely on our allies and we work collectively together to come up with the right solutions.
Yeah, and that reminds me of something of a portion of the conversation that we had yesterday at the panel discussion around the importance of allyship and that it takes everyone's to be at the table in terms of advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion. So thank you for that story, and thank you for sharing the personal story, Paul. Over to you, Manuelita. As a member of the ROM leadership team and serving on many leadership teams in the past, how have you encouraged the executive teams to really advance diversity, equity, inclusion, double down in certain areas, right, and take it seriously, for lack of better words, right? I know there's a lot of organizations that have pulled back some of their funding in the space of diversity, equity, inclusion. So how have you seen this work well with executive teams that you've sat on?
Okay. So one of the, of course, we know that the commitment to DEI in an organization does start at the top. If there's no role modeling at the top or in the leadership team or in the management team, then obviously employees are getting a strong message that it's not that important. So one of the things that's been really helpful in my experience is having the appropriate conversations on a timely basis. So there's always, formal program, there's initiatives, et cetera, but from a leadership perspective, it really comes down to those individual conversations around what's going well, what's not going well, opportunities to be a role model. So some examples, we're in a leadership meeting, or we're in a meeting with a lot of the management team, and somebody makes a comment, one of the leaders makes a comment that is not necessarily 100% role model-like. So afterwards, it's a conversation that starts with understanding. You said such and such a thing. What do you think? It seemed like the reaction wasn't what you expected. What are your thoughts on that? Here's how we can do differently. Here's how we can ensure that people hearing you are not impacted negatively in the future. How can I help? What tools can I provide? What supports can I provide? And those conversations make a big difference, because not only do they keep DEI top of mind and how we can, as leaders, model some of the behaviors we want to see, but also gives people an opportunity to exchange. And of course, it starts with building trust first, so that you can then have those conversations.
Thank you. Yeah. So then, Paul, from your perspective, in terms of over the last couple of years, we know 2020 was a pivotal year for diversity, equity, and inclusion as a practice, right? With the murder of George Floyd in the US, in 2021 in Canada with the mass findings of residential graves for our Indigenous population, a lot of organizations doubled down their commitments to DEI, of which we've seen some actually pull back, right? And I would argue those that pulled back were the ones that didn't have the systemic changes internally to really keep things moving forward. What would you say, or what advice would you give to members of the audience here that may be in organizations that are seeing disproportionate level of decrease in funding for their DE&I programs, as we do know the economy is slowing down a little bit? But what would we say to those organizations that are pulling back, for lack of better words?
So I had an opportunity to do a bit of a around the world sort of tour and talk to some CEOs. And one of the questions I asked is around, so let's talk about DEI and what are you seeing? And it was interesting. What they said was, I want you to go to LinkedIn and I want you to look at what people are showcasing around DEI. And what are they showcasing? Hey, I'm at this conference and everyone's wearing wonderful outfits and all glammed up, and they're talking about, we won an award and all this wonderful stuff. And they're celebrating. And then when you look at the stats, it's like, well, we still have work to do. We're not in a position, I think it's important to recognize and celebrate, but I think the balance is off kilter right now. And we're seeing too much celebration and not enough impact. And these CEOs are saying, we're spending all this money on these celebrations, yet the actual work still needs to happen. So I have three things I would say is, number one is, stop celebrating. How can you continue to celebrate when I walk outside and I see, I see the homeless issues that are taking place in this city. I see the fact that there's an Indigenous population that is still, to this very day, we haven't moved the needle enough in that space. I still think of organizations where their population, their female population, is less than 35, less than 40%. So yeah, you can take these small incremental wins and pat yourselves on the back, but it costs money to celebrate. Why don't you repurpose that money in terms of education and making sure that we're moving the needle in the right direction? Which leads me to point number two. Do the work. Do the work. And don't do it just behind the title of your role or the title of your company, but do the work personally. How many people can say, hey, our company's doing some great work around diversity. Excellent, amazing, fantastic. Now, what are you doing around diversity outside of your employer? Crickets. So do the work. Start with yourself. Do the work. And then show impact. I was talking to one CEO. They've got a chief mental health officer. They just offered 257 scholarships to the Indigenous population. They just offered 13 scholarships to Black high school students that come from marginalized communities. And I said, how come I don't see this, on LinkedIn or Facebook? It's that's not what we're all about. We're all about having impact. And that's what we care about. So those are the three things. if you're going to celebrate, do it in moderation, but continue to do the work and show impact.
Yeah, no, that really resonates with me because I do see a lot of organizations at times are very performative in nature, right? That you see that low-hanging fruit, and let's give this organization $5,000, let's do a couple of charitable donations here and there, but really there's no big impact in terms of the follow-through, right? And it's interesting, as I was sort of prepping for this panel discussion, moderating for this discussion, the three of us got on a call, and without even knowing what the DEI stands or strategies at ROM and with Paul's organization, I knew exactly what each of us were playing for. Within the Greater Toronto Area or in Canada, we're all playing for the exact same strategy. So Paul, I do really like the aspect of looking at the macro picture. How can we all, as corporate Canada, not as J&J, not as ROM, or not as any one of our organizations, do better for Canada, full stop, right? So that really resonates with me, Paul, as you sort of reflect there. Manuelita, over to you. Since 2020, the whole country, the whole nation, the whole world's been on a DE&I fast track. It's been hyper-polarizing for a lot of the organizations. A lot of good, tough conversations have taken place. How would you handle, or what would you say to those organizations that are seeing DEI fatigue? And how can we empower individuals that may be over-emotionally taxed to continue this journey of DEI?
So let's talk about DEI fatigue. I imagine, as we've discussed, a number of organizations either have their head office in the States or are influenced by what's going on in the States, where we hear a lot of in the news, there's court cases, et cetera. One of the things that I would say is to really look at the initiatives, the communication, the processes, et cetera, and embed them in how you do business. So the more DEI and the DEI principles of everyone having a voice, everyone feeling included, everyone being valued for what they bring to the table, the more that becomes part of how you do business, the easier it is to then see that as being something that is just part of the corporate life. The other thing that I would say is to ensure that you have, as Paul mentioned, that everyone's doing the work so that people feel like they can make a difference and that they focus on that as part of their day-to-day work. And what that will result in is that if your DEI leader, for example, if that job is eliminated, as we've seen, or if there's a reduction in investment, the work keeps on going, the actions, the changes keep going, because it's not just reliant on one person or one initiative or a department. It then becomes spread out throughout the organization. Just a couple of thoughts there.
That's great. And then, I think it ties into the next question really well, right? When we look at how do we embed DE&I into those areas and really have the business own it versus it falling on a select few of individuals, resulting in some of that fatigue, right, Manuelita? So Paul, what suggestions would you have of embedding DE&I, whether it's into the people pillar, the community pillar, the market pillar, but really just embedding it into an organization's one-pager?
I really liked your response there, because I think for organizations that may have had a DEI practitioner, since 2020 rather, 40% of DEI roles in terms of chief diversity officers or directors of diversities have been eliminated or amalgamated into someone else's role, right? So it's no longer about the top of the house as opposed to a top-down approach. It needs to be a bottom-up build. And I loved what you said around everyone has to play an accountable and take accountability in driving DEI. So the first thing I would say is, number one, is start from where you are, right? And I love the idea that we are not all on the same playing field. We are all starting at different places, and that's fine. And this landscape is changing all the time. We were talking about how, one day it's, what is it now? Like, last I heard it's now JEDI, right? Justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. Before that, it was the terminology varies, but start from where you are, and I would encourage you to have someone audit your processes. Like, I would have someone come in and look at your HR or your people practices and identify, there's some barriers here, you might want to do that. but get an external third party to do that work. The second thing is embed DEI into all your programs. People think that's a gigantic task. It is. But I think the return on investment is far worth the work effort, where it becomes built in and it's permeated into the culture and the fabric of your company. The benefit of that is, if you think about this next generation, that's table stakes. If you don't have, whether it's impact or sustainability or DEI practices, no matter how much you're paying, they will probably say no. And the data's proving that unless you have those foundational, making an impact on society, making this world a better place, then you might be challenged in attracting that next generation. And then the third piece is engage in the community. I played a part in understanding our, truth and reconciliation. And I say I played a part, even though it was under my remit, because I needed to talk to the community. I needed to go to the Indigenous community and have them co-build, in fact, have them build it for us. So if you're not comfortable, then I would encourage you to reach out to the community, reach out to the Black community. This is a great opportunity to have some real tough conversations around your commitment around different subsets. This is a great month for Pride. I love it, right? But we should be having those conversations 12 months of the year, not just during this month. Black History Month, February, we probably do one or two good things during that time period. And then after that, 11 months, it's silence. These should be ongoing conversations. And I loved what Dominique said around it's important that you're continuously listening to your employee. Well, this needs to be part of that listening exercise.
Thank you, Paul. Right, and I think if I look at the last three questions from the panelists, a common theme or red thread that we can tie through each of the questions is a lot of organizations, or my interpretation at least, a lot of organizations are starting from where they are on their journey, but they're starting from scratch. There's a lot of great material out there. There's a lot of organizations that will be very willing to help share a playbook, because we understand that we're all working towards a greater good, right? So what I would recommend is reaching out to those organizations. Look on LinkedIn, look on their websites. A lot of organizations have an ESG statement. Read their statements. There's a lot of great content that you can take from there, build programs, and start with baby steps. A lot of organizations are looking to, for lack of better words, hitting a grand slam. It's not about that. It's just, let's get on base first, right? We can't figure out we can't boil the ocean if we don't even have the utensils to start boiling the ocean, right? So it's just getting those micro, small steps to making sure you can get progressive change in the future. So we have one more question, and then we'll open it up to the audience for some questions. And this one's over to you, Manuelita. A key stakeholder of advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion is our talent acquisition function. How have you seen elements of DE&I being embedded into the TA functions when you look at attracting the next generation of talent?
Okay, I'll keep my answer short because I know people may have questions. So when we talk about attraction, the selection process, the interview process, a few things that have been very, very helpful in the organizations I've worked in. First of all, making sure that to the extent possible, your talent acquisition team is diverse, because that helps embed this mindset of wanting a variety of candidates. I always say to managers, leaders, it starts with having a broad range of candidates, and then you select the best. And if you have a broad range, the best will be part of that broad range. The other thing that's worked really well is having representation at things like career fairs, events, etc., so that the candidates or potential candidates are already seeing that the organization is serious about hiring for diversity. And then another thing is providing tools. So we've had training, we've had around anti-bias during the interview process. We've had conversations to help leaders, managers, hiring managers who might need extra support. And we have also had, kind of quick reference guides, et cetera, and partnerships in in communities with organizations that specialize in building those relationships themselves so that the candidates can be encouraged to apply. Those are a few things. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Paul. Thank you, Manuelita, for the panel. We'll open it up now to the audience for any questions. We have one up front here. We have about 6 minutes plus some closing remarks.
Hello. I have two, if that's all right. The first one is, have any of your employee listening campaigns unearthed anything that isn't necessarily aligned with the broader issues or the more common issues of today, and how did you handle it? And my second question is, what advice would you give to anyone that wants to be an ally for any given cause, but I guess is afraid of how to go around it? The way I've seen some of that materialize is through secondhand offense, like where people get overly offensed by certain things that aren't necessarily issues to that particular group.
I'll start with the second part, and I think, I know and I believe firmly that in order to get this work done properly, we have to show grace. We have to show forgiveness. We have to, it's interesting, there's so many ERG groups that are out there, and I think about one, let's just pick on accessibility, right? And people feel, well, if I don't have any accessibility challenges, I can't be a part of that ERG group. Absolutely not, right? I look at certain groups, for example, we have this one group that I'm familiar with called the Black Pride Network, and about 15% of that group are non-Blacks. And it's because it's an opportunity to learn. So I think starting with your organization, you have to create a culture where it is about showing grace constantly, because this is a learning journey for all of us. I sit here as a Black man, and I am still learning how to be a Black man, and I'm still learning about the challenges that Black men face in our society. So if I don't know it 100%, I don't expect you to know it, I don't expect you to know it, but I'm welcome to have a conversation with you, and we can talk about it collectively. So showing grace is so important as part of this work. And I think I've been in conferences where people are just laying into someone because they use an incorrect term. It's like, you know what? You just completely turned me off of you and diversity, right? So I think we have to show grace, and we have to acknowledge that this is a very volatile landscape, but we collectively, if we can forgive, if we can listen, if we can understand, we'll move the needle in the right direction together.
And I think with your first question, what I've seen a lot unearthed in employee sentiment or employee listening sessions has been around the need to go above compliance as it relates to accessibility. A lot of corporations, especially in Ontario, will rely on the minimum standards from an AODA perspective as their DEI stance with regards to accessibility. We need to do more in terms of the space of accessibility for individuals that require more.
Hi there. It's kind of a specific question about walking the walk. I'm kind of hiding back here.
Oh, okay.
So how do you balance the tension between some organizational policies like return to office mandates, and I know Paul, in the case of LCBO, I think it's 3 days per week. So how do you balance that tension when you sort of know it goes against some sort of data points related to EDI, and how do you sort of communicate that to employees?
Well, okay, I'll speak about the return to office mandate. So my experience has been, with a couple of different organizations, the return to office will have different impacts on different types of people. If the organization, and it does start with leadership, because oftentimes the mandates will come from leadership, if the leadership is able to have a conversation around having flexibility even with that return to office mandate, that is really helpful. So things like giving people enough time to adapt to the fact that they will need to be back in office a certain number of days. Things like having individual conversations, and if needed, really looking at what does accommodation look like for specific situations. Ensuring that there is a process for people who need accommodations, ensuring that they feel comfortable having those conversations either with their manager or even with the HR team, so that as much as we want to be consistent, we're not forcing a one-size-fits-all. We're really paying attention to some of those specific situations where there may be a need for additional flexibility or adjustment or accommodation.
I would just to piggyback on that, two things. I get it. Policies are important. But in my mind, there are two things that trump policy. Number one is providing psychological safety for that employee. And number two is meeting that employee where they're at. Then policy, right? So if someone comes to me and says, hey, Paul, I've got an ailing mom that I need to look after, and we've got 4 days of appointments that I need to go to. I know our policy says 3 days in the office. I can't do it. I don't even let them finish the sentence. It's like, you take care of your family first. The policy will take care of that later. So I think it's about psychological safety, creating that environment, and especially now coming out of the pandemic. And I said I'd only use that word like 4 times today, and I'm already at 10. But coming out of that thing that happened a few years ago, people are still reeling from it. People are still adjusting. People are still struggling. So how are we to mandate that someone needs to be in the office when it impacts their psychological safety? And I think more importantly is, and I loved what you said, and it goes back to what Dominique said, you have to meet people where they're at. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. I'm going to have a conversation with you, and what you need is going to be very different than what you need. And as a leader, we're all leaders in here, we have to recognize that. So, and I've had conversations with leaders that say, hey, don't forget to follow the policy. It's like, well, yeah, I'll follow the policy when it makes sense to follow the policy. And in my mind, the policies are guardrails. And once in a while, you kind of have to rub up against those guardrails, right? So psychological safety first, and then meeting the employee where they're at, then policy.
Cool. So we're nearing time. So both Paul and Manuelita, if we had one piece of advice for the team as they're looking to advance DE&I in their organizations, and what would your calls of action be? Paul?
Another friend of mine wrote a book, and it's called Leading Through Crisis and Transition. And it's an ebook, and it's free. And I would encourage you to read it. It's 13 pages. In there are some incredible tips and tricks around how to be an effective leader in this day and age. The other thing I will say is, I just saw this quote this morning, and I thought, we do a good job of hiding behind our title, hiding behind our company. But you know what the reality is? Your smile is your logo, your personality is your business card, and the way you make others feel is your trademark. The importance of that is, it's got nothing to do with your company, it's got nothing to do with your job title, it's got everything to do with you. So my one advice is start with you. Don't worry about what the company's doing. Change and model your behaviors after someone that is showing compassion, someone that cares, and of course, someone that offers grace to everyone around you.
So to help advance DEI, I would reinforce what's been mentioned already this morning, which is it's a journey. Organizations are at different places. Be aware of where your organization is and start from there, because you may have worked in an organization that's way ahead. Other organizations are at the very beginning. They're still trying to define what diversity is. So just be aware of that, and it will really help you in your conversations. The second piece that I would say is 2 words: courage and compassion. So it takes courage to have some of the conversations that are more difficult. If you need courage, allies are a good source of helping you build that courage. Practice. Trusted colleagues or family will help you build that courage and kind of role model and practice some of the conversations you need to have. And then the second one is around compassion. The curiosity, the seeking to understand, the giving each other grace, as we talked about earlier. That is going to be very helpful in the conversations that you need to have, and also compassion for yourself, because we're all learning also.
And my quick call to action, very quick: progress over perfection. I know we're all trying to get the most perfect DE&I strategy. It doesn't exist. Incremental progress, 1% change day over day, that's how you'll get change. Sometimes it's okay to go to your senior leaders and say, we're riding this bike as we build it, and that's okay, right? So just progress over perfection.
Love that.
But with that team, we're at time, so please join me in welcome and thanking both Paul and Manuelita.
Thank you, George. Thank you. Nice job, bud.